When you have a trilogy of movies set around the concept of time travel, there are always going to be problems with the story. Thinking about how the whole concept works and the amount of problems it can cause can honestly give you a headache if you think about it for too long. But most of the time, you can just sit back and zone out and enjoy the movie for what it is. And that is the case with Back to the Future. Now, while this series does have its fair share of problems when it comes to how time travel works in this specific universe, it's really only the two sequels that have most of the glaring problems. I mean, in the second and third film, they're all over the place. But the first film is pretty solid. It doesn't really have too many mistakes when it has to do with the whole time travel aspect of the film. It's pretty straightforward for the most part. However, there is one big problem in the first Back to the Future movie that has stunned fans since the movie's release in 1985. And that is, why don't Marty's parents remember him when he returns to the present day at the end of the film? First, let me explain. At the start of the first film, it takes place in 1985. Marty meets up with Doc in a car park in the middle of the night to test his new invention. Long story short, Marty ends up 30 years into the past in the year 1955. Here he bumps into his parents and causes them not to meet, therefore spending the rest of the movie trying to get them to fall in love so when he gets back to the future, he will still exist. When he does get back to the future, however, his family are very different from when he left due to him changing the story of how they met and him interfering with them during that week. Considering the massive impact he had on them during the week he was there, it seems like they would remember him, right? That is the plot hole that has confused people for so many years. Now, here's the thing. This isn't really a plot hole. I do see why it might be considered one, but there are multiple reasons why George and Lorraine might not recognise Marty, and that is what I'll be explaining in today's video. Now firstly, the biggest argument here is that Marty had a big impact on their relationship while he was stuck in 1955. Without him having to interfere, they would have never met and fallen in love on this particular timeline. Now, I do get this. Without Marty giving George all of the advice, he never would have met Marty's mother. No, stop. I can't get copyright claimed. So, the point is, surely they would remember this kid that helped them start their relationship, right? Well, sort of, but not really. Think about it. Marty was in 1955 for 1 week. 1 week. And in that week, he only really interacted with his parents a few times. So let's just go over some of the key elements from the film in which Marty interacts with his parents. He arrives on Saturday 5th of November 1955 and bumps into his dad briefly at the cafe. He then causes them not to meet, and Marty instead meets his mum when her dad hits him with the car. He doesn't see his parents again though until most likely Monday, which is the start of the new school week, where we can see them all briefly on screen together. After following his dad home, he doesn't see him again until the following day after school, where he tries to get George to ask out Lorraine. Unfortunately, that evening, Lorraine follows Marty home and asks out Marty instead. The next time we see either Marty or George interact with each other is most likely taking place a few days later on the Friday after school. We can assume it's been a few days considering they haven't made much progress apart from putting together a game plan. This then leads to the Saturday night of the dance, where he finally gets his parents to properly interact before he goes back to the future. So even though Marty did have a big part in them getting together, to be realistic, he was only there for a week. And if we look at the moments from the film where he does interact, it wouldn't have been every day, and the times where he did interact, they were pretty brief. Doc probably knew this. If he let Marty interact with his parents too many times, then it would cause even more issues on the timeline. So he only let Marty interact with them when he needed to. And that is shown in the film. Remember, George and Lorraine met this kid Marty 30 years ago, back when they were still in high school. I'm not doubting they remember anything by the time it gets to 1985, but remember, in their eyes, Marty was just some random kid that turned up for a week and was sort of involved in the story of how they met. This was just a small period in their lives when they met him, just a speck on the timeline when you think about it. The chances are they probably do recall this kid having something to do with them getting together. I mean, George literally wrote a book in the alternate 1985 when Marty got back, and it looks like it's a love story that was inspired by the events of the film. But from what we can see in the movie, there's no photographic evidence that Marty was even there. There's no photos for them to look back on and compare the similarities between their son and this kid they met briefly in high school. And I can imagine that they can't really recall every detail about his appearance. I mean, it was 3 decades ago. Besides, Marty has pretty generic features anyway, and there's probably a lot of guys that look very similar. And if I also may add, they remember Biff having more to do with them getting together than Marty ever did. Probably because Biff is a part of their lives now, while Marty, that they knew from 1955, isn't. From their point of view, what we can see from the ending of the film, when they say how they fell in love, they don't even mention Marty. They give Biff most of the credit.
Although it wasn't for him,
we never would have fallen in love.
That's right.
Seems strange, considering when Marty left, George literally said,
Well, Marty, I want to thank you for all your good advice. I'll never forget it.
but it's such a distant memory, and there was so much that happened in that week anyway. And in the slight chance they somehow do remember what this strange kid from the 50s looked like, that they met all the way back in high school, they probably just would have recognised the resemblance years ago. Because why would it get brought up right now when Marty gets back? Obviously, their first conclusion wouldn't have been that their son is a time traveller that interfered with their relationship. It's not uncommon to see similarities between people who you knew in the past and that you know now. So to wrap things up, that is why George and Lorraine don't most likely probably remember Marty from the 50s. It was 30 years ago, he was there for a week with very brief encounters in between with his parents, and to put things simply, they just don't remember much about him, which is fair enough, right? It can be hard to recall someone's full appearance after so many years. That is why this isn't really a plot hole in the film, but more to do with the fact that the evidence from the movie suggests that this was just a small period on the timeline that can be easily explained. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a big thumbs up to see more Back to the Future videos like this one. And also comment down below if you have any suggestions for future videos. I'm sorry I haven't uploaded for ages. I've just been really busy, but I hope to upload more regularly when I can. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next Friday.